Hello and welcome to another Aziz Corporate podcast. This time we're talking about DEI, which stands for Diversity, Equity and Inclusion. And I'm very pleased to be joined by a senior colleague of mine within Aziz Corporate, Catherine Hamilton, who has kind of written a book on this. She is the queen, if I'm allowed to say that, and I'm looking forward to picking her brains and hearing some fascinating insights. Inclusive leadership is a phrase that trips easily off the tongue of many people. But what does it actually mean in practice, Catherine?
So inclusive leadership is probably different for different people. It's probably an aspiration for some people. We would all hope that we were being inclusive and that we lead in an inclusive way. And so I think it's a great question to say, so what does that actually mean I do in practice? And I think for me, I would like to think that I was an inclusive leader, and what I would really like to see in others is particularly, how well do you know the way you're impacting people around you, and what are you doing about understanding that? And so being willing then to be, genuinely curious to discover what other people need, and then how you can adapt your behavior or change the way you're leading or the environment in order to help more people get more of what they need to bring out the best in them in the workplace. And so it takes many, many different angles. It is about equality, it is about fairness, it is about transparency. But ultimately, as a leader, I would say is how well do you know how you're impacting other people, and how effective is that, and what are you willing to do to change it? So it takes a lot of skills, such as, being open-minded, effective listening, having empathy. And again, we talk about those things really easily. Oh, yes, we need to be open-minded. We need to listen. Well, all of them are skills that none of us are experts at. We may all think we're good listeners, always more to do.
And given all your experience of coaching in diversity, equity and inclusion, what are the common barriers that you see leaders facing that really stop them embracing this as much as perhaps they would want to?
So I think some of the barriers to inclusive leadership is the fact that so many people are talking about it now that we might get a bit complacent and think, I've done my bit. I've set up a network for women. We've ticked that box, or we've got a policy now on flexible working. I can tick that box. So some of the barriers is that we're perhaps seeking badges and accolades for what we're doing. The resources are being pulled away, or we've done it. So the resources and the specialist resources aren't there. We rely often just on people to volunteer to do quite a significant or quite a time conscious role to move the inclusion and diversity agenda on. So there are a lot. Those are just some of the barriers, but I think as an individual, as a leader, probably the key ones is the fear of getting it wrong. The political correctness. There's a lot in the social media. Somebody uses the wrong term, the wrong word, makes a flippant comment, and absolutely they're pulled up on it because that's how we learn. But then are we stifling real inclusive leadership because there's a fear of so much of not knowing what I need to be doing? So people perhaps pull back.
Some of the social media pylons are just mind-boggling. I mean, just think, hang on a minute. People do make mistakes. Cut them some slack. And I think what I find
Well, let me just say, Khalid, I'm not just about cutting them slack. I think we need to encourage people to apologize and recognize, acknowledge, wow, yeah, I wasn't aware of that. I got that wrong, and I want to learn and do better. As an inclusive leadership, that is how we would role model inclusion. It's not saying, oh, come on, this is just someone, it's political correctness, social media gone mad. Absolutely, we absolutely would not say that. We need people to own their mistake and be willing to learn from it.
And when you look at people who, I have a bit of sympathy for people who have been brought up in, say, one culture.
Mm-hmm.
And let's, for the sake of argument, say a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant culture. And the world has moved very, very swiftly. And I think some people genuinely struggle with some of that. I also think that some people hide behind it and won't, wake up and smell the coffee on it. I think that's true too. But it is tricky. And when I'm sure, like you, I've done what I would call remedial coaching, where somebody's come with a real problem. And the challenge for the organization is, we need this person. They are very good at what they do.
Yes.
But the problem we've got is they're in the dark ages as far as DEI is concerned. can you fix them? And that's a big coaching challenge. And we have been at Aziz Corporate, I mean, not just me, but our other people within our team have been very successful in turning that around. And as you say, it's usually just a lack of awareness. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
I didn't
A
real.
complete ignorance. I mean, completely unaware, unconscious that what they've said or what they've done could possibly impact somebody so profoundly. And so you have to be willing to think, I did get that wrong. There must be another way, and I need to change the way I behave, and not just during the coaching and say, yes, I'm fixed, but an ongoing, because habits, as we know, are very, very hard to break. And they need that constant reminders and practice, and then affirmations that, the changes are working to really change somebody's behavior.
How much do you think the struggle that some businesses have is the challenge that there is to try and measure how effectively DEI is being performed within the business? And, the old adage is, you can't measure it, you can't manage it.
Yeah.
I mean, it is quite measurements. I mean, I suppose employee surveys would go some way
Mm,
towards that. But, we know that employee surveys have their own inbuilt biases. For example, I've never known an employee survey which says we have too much communication from the management. They always say there isn't enough communication. So
yeah.
how much do you think that's an issue?
Yeah. Employee surveys are a rich source of data, but I think we have to be very careful and clever with the way we're asking questions, and making sure that not only do we ask the right questions, that we send out that in employee survey with communications that, this is why we want it and how important it is, because otherwise people treat it with contempt, with suspicion. If we really want some honest data, we have to do it in a very sensitive way and be open about what we're collecting it for. And then we have to be seen to acting on it, don't we? So if we say, how much do you think your contribution is valued by your manager? And 85% saying, I don't think it's valued at all, and nothing is done, why would you bother to fill in that survey next time? We've raised people's expectations, so now we need to fulfill them. So I think employee surveys are a really good measure, but also so are those everyday conversations, getting your team together and say, look, let's talk about this topic. What are we thinking about it? What's working? What's not working? What could we do better? I think there's more that can be done probably in the smaller teams, in business units, in departments, as opposed to a whole business, because it's much more real for the people who are working in that part of the business.
And I guess with the employee survey stuff, to pick up on your point, it's that line about, well, you told us this, and this is what we've done.
Mm,
So important to do that. There are some other areas. I mean, the most obvious area is cultural, ethnically diverse people. That's almost easier to spot because people look different and sound different.
mhm,
What about some of the less easy to spot things? I'm thinking of neurodiverse employees and those
mm.
with invisible disabilities, people who are very good at their job until, for example, pressure comes on and they can't cope with that kind of pressure. I mean, that's quite difficult in a thrusting company with a macho leadership.
Yeah. And again, that comes back to, if you were an inclusive leader, you would be anticipating, you'd be thinking ahead. And when you're putting a policy in place or even doing a change around in the organization, a physical layout, you'd just be a bit more open-minded and think, what if, and what could we do? And what really good inclusive companies, organizations have discovered is, if you put in place something that benefits a minority, whether it's a hidden disability or someone with caring responsibility, it benefits everybody. So let's not be, short with that. Let's try and anticipate, be more proactive, and just think differently. There are lots of examples where, buildings have been designed and no one ever thought about a wider exit for a wheelchair, or nobody thought about using different colours to suit someone with dyslexia. So we need to also engage with the very people who have a different need, maybe a unique need, to ask that question, what is it that we can do to ensure that you can work to your full potential in the office? Again, an inclusive leader would be doing that more of the time.
And Catherine, you've got so much experience in this. Can you give us some examples of companies or leaders who are doing exceptional work in DEI?
Well, I'm not going to name companies, because actually I don't think any one company has it all. I think there are pockets of really good practice. So, networks, they haven't run their course. I think there's a lot of, again, going back to people getting a bit complacent. Oh, we've done that. We've ticked the box. Networks really have their place, because if we're talking about people who are maybe unique, or they are in the minority, there aren't the role models, the support that they can give to help people build their confidence, reframe those self-doubts, are really, really important. I think where people are anticipating, not waiting for a new law to come in, but being proactive and thinking ahead and thinking about what might happen as a result of that. So inclusive organisations were probably much better prepared for the hybrid working. They put things in place very quickly to make sure that whether you loved it, you hated it, then, coming back or staying at home, there was far more adaptions there, and that ability to talk to your employees and saying, what is it that we can do to be more effective together? We can't please everybody all of the time. That is very, very difficult to do, to please every single unique person all of the time. But what we can do is please more people more of the time. So I think there's, depending what people want to do, but I think if we focus on inclusion as a whole and diversity as a whole, as opposed to going down one route, let's really focus on, gender or ethnicity or disability. If we focus on how do we make this more inclusive for the whole, and don't rely on those people at the top of your organization, because until the tops of organizations consistently become more diverse, and across all the different spectrums of diversity, we are still in danger of the biases inbred within their perceptions of what inclusion looks like. So we need to be drawing upon all those differences that we have available in our business.
And how do you think we're doing at the moment in the UK, particularly when you contrast it to other countries in which I know you work too?
There again, it's so pockets. We mentioned earlier about the dark age. I have worked with an organisation. I think, where have they been for the last 50 years? But I also then work in an organisation. I think this is just such a breath of fresh air. There are different things going on in different countries. So I'd say, we do well. We have a lot of awards, very public awards and recognition that really does try to bring out and recognise the good work that's going on. So I do think we should be celebrating, sharing those successes, benchmarking with other countries for different things. But I also think we have to be very, coming back to your being culturally aware. If you go to a global organisation where they have very different cultures, they still need to sometimes be a country specific or a culturally specific, have policies that meet them. They struggle to have something that fits everybody. And so I think we have to be very willing to say, in the UK, we might do this, in America, we might do that. Partly law, but also partly because culturally it fits better. So even how a policy is written, the language that we use.
Well, there's no doubt that DEI is going to be with us for some time, and
I hope so.
It's a journey still that we're on.
Yes.
Nobody's particularly sure quite how far along the road we've got, but we are getting there, as British Rail used to say. We're getting there. Catherine, thank you very much indeed. Sorry, you wanted to add one more thing.
Well, I was just going to say one thing. I think, coming back to that measure, maybe we look at, when we see challenges being raised, and almost we take a step forward and we take 2 steps back. At least the awareness is there. And of course, it's like anything, you put a harassment and bullying policy in your organisation, suddenly lots of cases will, come out of places and for years going back. And you think, oh, goodness, we should never have shaken that hornet's nest. But it moves us on. So I think the poor behaviours that we're still hearing about and witnessing will only move us to a better place. So we have to sometimes tread through treacle a bit and work through those challenges to really take us forward. But definitely we are moving so much in the right direction.
Catherine, thank you very much indeed. And if you've enjoyed this podcast, let us know. Even if you haven't enjoyed it, let us know. And if you've got any comments to make or suggestions about other podcast subjects we might go for, please do get in touch. The easiest one is kate@azizcorp.com. And we look forward to talking to you and hearing from you next time.